Hi. So I've been messing around with the Plaits quite a bit recently, and I've been using the melodic modes, the green modes on the left, quite a lot in some songs I've been releasing. The songs I released last week, which you can see on my channel, I'll leave a link in the description. Particularly the A side, I used the Plaits loads of the melodies that you hear in that are the Plaits. Most of the polyphonic stuff is my MC303, but all of the monophonic synth lines pretty much are Plaits. But what I wanted to explore more is the right hand side, which is the sort of red drum modes on the Plaits. So I've set up this patch which using the CV pal to control it uses a mixture of drum modes to basically use it as a monophonic drum machine. And the results from this are really cool, and you could do it with not very much equipment at all. So yeah, I'll sort of run through how I've got it set up and have a bit of a play with it. Maybe it's something, if you haven't tried already, that you could try with your Plaits. So the most basic way you could set this up is how it's set up now. It's running through a filter, which it doesn't need to run through. But connected up to Plaits, you've got the output coming out, and a CV from a sequencer is going into the model, which means you can see on the red light, this pulsing light is where it's set as default, and the light that's jumping about is where it's moving to based on the sequencer. So this means, although you can't play more than one drum at once, if you feed it a trigger, which I'm doing with the trigger out of the CV pal, you can keep changing the model. You can play a variety of drum sounds. You know, it takes a bit of doing to get it so that it's jumping about to the exact correct point, but once you get it, it's really effective. So yeah, any sequencer, something like a Beat Step or a Beat Step Pro or even an SQ1, any sort of basic sequencer that's got gate and CV, you can use it to control it in this way. So I'll just hire it up so you can hear it. This is with no modulation, no pitch modulation or anything. So as you can hear, there's the bottom three modes are a kick, a snare and a hi-hat. So that's what I'm using for most of it, because they're the sort of basic drum modes. Occasionally I jump it to one of the resonator modes to add a bit of variation. So already for just a sort of simple sort of 808 type basic drum sound, I think that's quite an effective way of adding some drums to a track. You know, if you haven't got a drum machine, that's a perfectly good way to do it. But when it really gets fun is when you start feeding modulation and pitch modulation to it. So the easiest way to do that, even if this is the only module you've just got this in a sequencer, is to use the FM. The decay envelope that's built in is directly wired to the FM. So I'll show you that now. So it'll make the pitch drop down or rise up suddenly at the start of each hit. So you saw me messing with the morph as well. In the drum modes, or in a lot of the drum modes, morph is the decay. So you can hear that a little bit more prominently when you increase the decay slightly. If you've got any kind of modular setup, which you probably do if you've got a Plaits, or if you've got another sequencer, which the CV pal has a second output, that opens up ways to make this sound completely different and a lot more interesting. You're not just limited to jumping between different models, you can also vary the pitch and all of the parameters with CV. So probably the first obvious thing is to send another sequence to pitch. So I've got a sequence coming out of output 1 of CV pal, which is some pitch information, which will vary this quite a lot. So I'm not messing with the kick drum too much. You could, if you had a slightly longer decay on the kick, you could get that to create sort of a bass line. I'm mostly using it to mess slightly with the hats and snare and with the resonator, because that's got a much stronger sort of tonal center to it. So yeah, instantly that makes it sound like you're using lots of different drum sounds when actually you're just using 3 or 4. You're just varying the pitch, and you can kind of just keep going with that by plugging into any of the modulation inputs. The second thing I did was take another gate out from my sequencer. This is just the gate from the CV that's changing the model. Send that into a Turing machine. So I can then send the Turing machine to change something like morph, which is, as I said, the decay. So try that now. So straight away that adds even more variation, because it's especially things like random modulation really make it, I don't know, sound a little bit more human, I think. And varying that decay just makes all of the drums different each time you play them, not just in pitch, but even if you're using the same loop again and again, the randomness from that will constantly vary how the loop sounds. So throughout a song, it stops it from getting repetitive and boring. So yeah, that's the general idea. Then there's obviously, you can just keep patching. The more, I've got quite a small system, so I've not got loads of modulation outputs. I've got this looping envelope here, so I can send that into something like harmonics, which I'm not sure what the official description of what the harmonics knob does in the drum modes is, but it seems to just make everything harsher. So yeah, I'll send that to harmonics, see what that sounds like. You can see the speed it's pulsing at from this LED here. Another thing I like doing is, especially if you're in this, it's a little bit tricky because you can't move backwards on the mode you're attached to, but you can move forwards. So if you're fairly quick, you can push it so that it limits out at just the snare and the hi-hat, or just the hi-hat by pressing this button. You've then got to loop all the way back through to get back to where you were, which is the problem. But if you do it fairly quickly, it's quite a cool little performance feature. Yeah, so I'm sure if you practiced with that, you could get that sort of working a lot smoother and use it in a performance. With all that modulation and a basic sequencer, you can make a full sort of drum machine from Plaits. And this is on top of all of the melodic modes, which just sound ace for anything melodic that you want to do. The last thing I'd say is, what's then fun is to run it through something like a delay or a filter, so you can maybe high pass filter it or add some clock delays to it. That adds even more sort of possibilities to it. And yeah, just experiment with different starting places. Maybe if you have it at the top. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you move it to a different starting point further up, it instantly makes it sound completely different. It's a completely different vibe, so you could use it for a sort of B section of a song and then go back to the original drum set. There's loads of options, and obviously if you've got a fairly complex sequencer, you can really mess with different sequences as well. And obviously if you really want to try something crazy, switch it to green mode and you'll get really weird sounds.